Hello, my name is Sarah Manley, and today I'm going to be discussing the strengths and limitations of interviews in research. So beginning with strengths. Interviews provide researchers the opportunity to gather data that cannot be directly observed, such as an individual's thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. The researcher can gain unique knowledge in allowing participants to share their lived experiences. Interviews are a way to reach large populations that otherwise would be too large to be observed, for example, via telephone interviews. In some cases, interviews may be the only way to reach a certain population, for example, undocumented immigrants. Subjects may prefer interviews over other research methods due to the ability to respond when convenient for them. The interview design allows researchers to formulate questions that align with their research. Structured interviews use an interview schedule that contains structured questions that do not allow for deviations from the sequence of questions or the language used. This lowers the risk of interview bias and increases standardization across the study. Unstructured interviews are non-directive, often using an interview guide that includes themes to be discussed rather than specific questions. Researchers can probe, clarify issues, or ask questions depending on what is discussed and based upon the participants' responses. This method of interviewing may increase the validity of the study. While the interview method offers many strengths, it's not without its limitations. Interviews can be time-consuming and resource-intensive. In choosing interviews, the researcher must be mindful of time constraints, human resources, and financial considerations, in conjunction with the research method and the sample size. Interpretation of interview data is another factor to consider. Interview data should be taken for what it is: personal narratives of experiences versus factual records or accurate explanations of human behavior. As with any research method, bias can significantly impact the validity of a study's results. Potential biases include non-response bias, sampling bias, social desirability bias, recall bias, common methods bias, and observer expectancy bias. Throughout the next few slides, we will review each of these concepts in more detail. Non-response bias or low response bias is common in survey research, and targeted respondents may be persuaded or dissuaded into participating based upon past experiences or their current impressions of the interviewers. For example, a person who has been satisfied with a particular product may be keen to participate in an interview on that product compared to someone who has not been satisfied with it. Choice of interview modality may implicate sampling bias by systematically excluding certain populations. For example, if conducting telephone interviews with a random sample from listed phone numbers, those with unlisted numbers will be excluded. Social desirability bias may occur when respondents modify or embellish their answers to paint a more positive picture of people, places, or situations. This can compromise the validity of responses obtained, but may also be overcome by experienced interviewers who can ask probing questions to provide a more comprehensive overview of the scenario. When interview questions focus on events of the past, participants may have difficulty recalling their motivations, their feelings, or their behaviors, and therefore be unable to respond with certainty. This is called recall bias and can be mitigated by ensuring questions are rooted in a participant's memory of events as they occurred versus asking people to remember their thoughts or perceptions from memory. Common method bias occurs when two or more constructs or variables of interest are measured using the same instrument in a similar way, for example, using a Likert scale. This may result in reduced reliability or validity due to the variables not being adequately separated from measurement artifacts. Ways to avoid this include separating the independent and the dependent variables by creating a short-term lag between measurements, for example, in interviews, and using different methods to measure variables, for example, using questionnaires and interviews. Finally, because the interviewer is such an integral part of the interview process, it's important they don't contribute further bias to the process through their own individual tendencies, preferences, or opinions. This may be more of a concern during unstructured interviews when researchers have more leniency with their questions. Observer expectancy bias occurs when the perceived expectations of an observer, the interviewer, influence the people being observed, the interviewees. For example, subtle cues given by an interviewer may influence participants' answers, so they're more in line with the interviewer's goals, especially if the interviewee has a positive impression of the interviewer. Interviewers may also collect and interpret data in a way that best supports their hypotheses and disregards information that refutes it. Ways to minimize interviewer bias include specialized interviewer training prior to the study, which should include detailed information on the study's purpose, the methods, the data collection processes, the importance of maintaining neutrality and reducing bias as well. Interviewers can increase rigor of the study by documenting in a clear and a timely way and reflecting on the interviewer process by using a reflective diary to document his or her experience and observations during the interview process. The references for this video can be found here. For more information on interviews and research, please visit different sections of the website. For more specific information on interviews and strengths and limitations, please check out the Strengths and Limitations tab of this website. Thank you very much.